So thank you very much for all these presentations. It was very interesting in different aspects. And of course, in the last presentations, we saw, and also in the other presentations, I always had the feeling it is quite a bit about education. And I was wondering, I mean, in your Gudskul, it seems like a deconstruction of what is an ordinary school. And I wonder how your students come to the school, or how you get your students, and what is the program of the school.
Yeah, thank you. It's like we're still playing with it because we kind of like trial and error. The inaugural session just ended because it's a year program. Just ended right now actually this month, and then we're starting next month for the new one. We changed a lot. Before it was like an open call, just open call with like CV, all those kind of stuff, It ranged between just graduated high school and then people that just like don't want to go to university, up until someone that's in the 40s. So, and then learning from that, it's kind of difficult for them to form a collective, basically, that way. They came from a collective background. A lot of them came from a collective background anyway, but to force them to think collectively at any given moment, it's kind of difficult. So this time, we're asking them to propose a project way before, so we don't need to teach, basically. So they would lead the process, and then we're going to like, kind of like tailor-made stuff for them, and then maybe kind of like forced marriage, from one project to another, like those kind of stuff, because we want to play with that because it's really, again, like we learned from that really kind of early on that certain format, class, task, score, all those kind of stuff are just like not the thing that they're used to. And then we want to criticize that as well, no? Who are we to give people tasks and then if they don't do it, they wouldn't graduate? It's kind of, it's kind of contradictory, basically. So it's an open call right now. It's happening, like interviews are still happening today. So I was also kind of like that update from, we could take maximum 20, but we started with 12. With that 12, only 9, I think, stayed. But then this time even less, I think, but more serious, which is maybe good. Like 7. And then we're asking also collectives from outside to, like, that's kind of like scholarship or something. So they don't, like, we support them to be there.
So you are kind of starting to curate education, right? I mean, kind of self-learning, but you are curating this kind of learning.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether, none of us are curators, so sometimes we don't know what the curatorial is, whatever. But if we're trying to find out what kind of animal could we give birth to. Yes. Well, so that's why it's kind of like testing. I hope it answers.
I mean, as we have kind of like a contrasting panel here, I think what is very interesting after modernization, that either started like through after independence as a new kind of opening, as new societal also structure, or it was implemented top down. So I'm quite curious because we have now, we're coming from Singapore, where the government, the state is basically, organizing change, or like, with Hong Kong is the same. Kowloon, West Kowloon is a huge government-supported project, and then we see self-organized projects that really, because from the lack of organization, there are also new forms. So how do you even interconnect? I mean, like how do you see that also in Southeast Asia? Where does it go from here?
That's a very good question. I was in Hong Kong and now I'm in Singapore, and really was wondering about that. I mean, that very, very freedom that you have, but also not necessarily without a structure, not necessarily without a method, right? So you're just testing, just improvising, and maybe looking at results and then changing. And that's something that I feel is important. So it's not like we need to take directions from whether it's Hong Kong or Singapore government, but it's something that we try to instill in the students. And I always talk to the students that it is important for them to be themselves. It's easier in Hong Kong than in Singapore. In Singapore, students are very comfortable with what the government has given them. So how to take that comfort away from them and make them think about where they are, who they are, and maybe create what they really want to see happening. And that, I think, is something that's it will take a few more years. So and I'm retiring, so we'll see.
No, the topic of infrastructure, honestly, like it's kind of it's very hard to think of what is better and not. Like the idea of formal or informal infrastructure. I mean, of course, West Kowloon is, people are highly skeptical about it from day one. Like, how can you create a district for cultural production? And there is no doubt around the suspicion because it's like a fake experiment, like a fake project or something like that. And so I think it's right to have those assumptions, but at the same time, we know that to have any sort of museum machinery, it is a very conventional format. You are dealing with real objects, conservation, it's a legality behind it. It has to be a machinery. And I think that this sort of infrastructure, whether it's a university, like a formal university that gives away particular degrees, or a museum that actually cares for objects, like for perpetuity, it does require this formal infrastructure and huge investment, no doubt. But at the same time, it does not mean that it's the solution or the origin or the sustainer of cultural development, right? We need both, I think, in any sort of situation. In fact, we believe, I think what we are trying to do also is to, how do we, as a so-called formal institution, also help to incite informal developments? And I mean, it's a challenge. We don't know yet, but I think in time, that's what I think any sort of institution needs to do. It's to have this sort of like a bit more porous kind of like working relationship or dialogue with those that are some seemingly ad hoc structures. So I think that's always what we are trying to avoid, is to not overprotect ourselves as an institution in such a way that you kind of keep things too neat or structured, but it's hard. I think I'm just saying, like, I'm representing my own views as well as some of the curators in the team. The machinery will always be there, but individually as curators, we believe that there needs to be that dialogue, and we are trying to find ways in which we can allow for that. It's not easy, but I think those two need to exist. Yeah.
Can I say something? So that's interesting because so at Social Art Projects that I co-run with my colleague, it's been 10 years, and it's an interesting journey, and also it's a point where the history taught us, as well as the longest running alternative institution has been 10 years. So we was like, okay, but what happened was the curriculum at the state university, in this case art and architecture, still quite limited, and they're still not so much open to experimental and contemporary practices. And what Social Art Project together with other colleagues, outside of the state institution, trying to respond to is just, trying to fill these gaps of opening up other possibilities. One of the a great example was Rayum Institute of Art and Culture, founded in the late 90s, which ran for 10 years, co-founded by scholar Ingrid Muan, which I mentioned before, and Cambodian scholar Lyno Vuth. So what they managed to do, which I found these, they had that strength, which social art project could not have. They had this strength to form a relationship and partnership with the Royal University of Fine Arts and work with the professors at that university, and being conscious about the existing so-called traditional knowledge production of anthropological, ethnographical approach and the traditional practice of art, but at the same time, strategically sort of opening up to the contemporary discussion, exploring materials, exploring into other practice with the students from that university, and as well as engaging with the professor and teacher from the Fine Art University. So I find this sort of I'm not sure whether this is but maybe it offers some sort of an answer. So how we can one way anchor on this traditional, because institution is institution, you choose to work with or not. So either you choose to work with what exists there and try to find ways to formulate and open up some rooms and to connect that and build that dialogue into sort of experimental process. However, at the moment, social art project, we could not officially partner with the Royal University of Fine Arts because of the politics of the university and the leadership and so on. So we are doing informally with the students outside of the school system, just with the students and with a couple of teachers, new generation of teachers, who are sort of more favored to the contemporary practice and experimental practice. So we are now doing kind of that way.
I mean, it's the same in Yangon or so in Myanmar. I mean, if you would not take up certain histories or look into that, it would just not happen. Mm-hmm. So you think you mandated yourself, or how did it start to get this interest also in the history of education that you showed us before?
Yes, as you know, our essential in my PowerPoint, we have a very how can I say, dark situation in the engineering architecture education in the long period, 16 years. And after that, at this time, the government are trying to force to the teachers to give up their jobs and careers. And that's why we lost a lot of the teachers from university to go give up their career. At that time, luckily, unfortunately, some of the architecture students go abroad to study for the architecture, and that they came back to our country, and now they are practicing and encouraging the career and the professionals in architecture. So now this is the very how can I say? Now this is the time to look to cooperate with the other international university to promote our education in architecture, also in the profession in the architecture industry.
Well, I heard today in almost all presentations that modernity that arrived after independence was first accepted by the local population, more or less, and then afterwards it disappeared due to economic development and influences coming from the outside and so on. But today, everyone is searching for a new approach, and in my opinion, a new kind of creativity is needed in order to find a local solution which fits really into the contemporary problem and tries to solve what society needs today. So there is a new kind of creativity needed. And the question is, how can education contribute to stimulate these young students to produce this new kind of creativity? Usually, I mean, if you go to an engineering college, the students are told what they have to do and what they have to learn, and at the end, if they come out, they can reproduce what their teachers taught them. But how do you create this new approach to creativity, to use this knowledge in a new way? Is there any idea how to do that? I mean, if I look, Shirley, at your exhibition in Hong Kong, I really was wondering how the public was looking at that. I mean, it's cross-disciplinary, and it is very complex and contradictory. So I really wonder, what did the public do with that?
Great question, because obviously the idea of education here, our learning department refuses to use that word, by the way, because education is a very kind of like one-way directional, as though you are just instructing and producing knowledge and that's it, but learning is what they are using at the moment, and learning itself is a conversation more and more. And so I think just to go back to that exhibition and the idea of the challenges of learning, for the learning and, okay, by the way, our learning and interpretation team is within curatorial. So that means curatorial framework and how we communicate our texts and everything has to go through learning interpretation so that it becomes something so-called completely accessible to people from all groups. So by that, it's already kind of breaking down the barrier of so-called the use of modernism. If you use the word modernism, you better qualify it or kind of like talk about it, kind of bring it down to like where people are able to enter it in different ways. And so that was hard because, you're trained as an art historian, architecture historian, and you want to use particular words. But then the L&I team would like, change it, something else, like something else that people can kind of get. And so that was a challenge, and so a challenge for us, but at the same time, this has to be done, or else the silos will continue to remain. And not only that, I think there was also, it's interesting, when we did the Southeast Asia show, Hong Kongers today don't really want to engage with Southeast Asia compared to Japan, Korea, or Europe, US, they're anti-China also. So it's kind of interesting, audience. So we have to almost talk about Southeast Asia in a way that links to the history of Hong Kong. So bringing up a work like Wong Kar-wai's films, for example, just reminds them, this is what Southeast Asia was in relation to Hong Kong at that period. It has changed because blah, blah, blah. So contextualize it, and even talking about so-called the Baton Rouge, brutalism architecture in Malaysia, we got to remind them, hey, there are similar architects in Hong Kong who've been trained similar ways. So kind of creating those kind of bridges are very key for us. So the idea of learning is not so much about educating, it's really creating common grounds and creating another perspective that relates to where you are, how you are seeing things now. So an opening up, as I guess you can say, as simple as that, and yet we think this is very important because an expanded view of things is highly critical today, because people are really trying to cling onto simple categories, and that's becoming very kind of narrow. And so we are trying in very simple ways to open things up. Keeping it that way.
Educators represent. But no, maybe learning is a good idea to use actually as a term. But one thing is, I think this is very specific from us, and I cannot pretend to do so. We don't, at least for us, we don't need to compete with what's already there. University is there, it's built because of certain things, with certain ideologies, all those kind of stuff. It works for certain people, fine, But what we know, a lot of us feel that it's not our place. So what we kind of what we can offer is something that we feel we would like to have. If it can be in dialogue with what's already existing, I think it's kind of it's actually the best scenario. It's not, again, it's not about competition, I guess, because again, if we understand it as an ecosystem, then everyone has has a part to play, you know. If it's a band, basically, if we four-piece that doesn't have a trumpet player, maybe they don't need it, but then if they become friends with a trumpet player, they would change the music directly, you know. So those kind of stuff. So it's like enriching, basically. So it can, hopefully there's not that predators is still needed, but when it becomes too big, then it becomes problem, or parasite. But as long as it's still, we can still live together, I think we're fine. So what I'm saying is just like the antagonism towards something. I think we're not using that as an entry point, almost. So hopefully it will actually like keep on enriching and then just like keep on new species and transmutation, all those kind of stuff, you know. Hopefully.
I'll use this word, maybe it's becoming sort of like redundant and overused, but critical consciousness. And I think that still remains very important and key to our classes at social art projects and at what we do. So our art classes are not just only about art, so it's about everything. So while they produce art, they're also exposed to, you know, other disciplines. And I tend to say this, and it's not from a sentiment of being nationalistic, but from a point of view of that you should know where you're from. You know your own history. You know your people before you who paved the way. Trying to grasp the philosophy, try to understand to the core how they innovated, you know, the way they do, the way they did. And so for us, what now, right? So through that sort of like critical reflections and the shuttling through history, but also to be globally aware. And we can't deny that, you know, we are enclosed, but we are all connected. So while one is being rooted and grounded, two is also being, you know, aware of what happening around. We learn from each other. We don't need to look so far away, where we look to our neighbor close to us. And one thing, I lost that one. Oh yes, so always the student in our classes, they came from, you know, different fields, information technology, health science as a midwife, there's an architect, there's like economist, there was like a monk, there's so many came from all different disciplines for the interest in the art. So I was quite very fascinated why they came as well. So I tend to encourage that be unique, be you know, through your previous discipline, through your previous background, and together with this sort of like class, then that can possibility of finding sort of like own unique language and possibility, you know, can open up other possibility of new expression.
I would add to that, I mean, like, because Farid, and so you also mentioned there is something we want that those institutions or those infrastructures are not giving us. So there is also a new generation coming up, and I mean, if we look up what's happening in Hong Kong at the moment, and just always a bit the elephant in the room, it's not Southeast Asia, but it was kind of Southeast Asia. If you look up to Southeast Asia, and sadly Avianti got ill, she mentioned also she is as an activist fighting radicalization, that she sees coming, religious radicalization or other forms of radicalization in Indonesia, for example. And we sometimes forget that Southeast Asia is still in the majority of countries are still under strong influence of the military or other authoritarian regimes. And so I just wonder, like, I mean, the modernist dream after independence also like seems a bit vanished. So I wonder also what you dream for, or what you look into with your projects, or like where you want to see your societies go, or as a region where you see maybe a positive future.
That's a very big one. No, I think working with say students in Hong Kong, I really see what's happening in Hong Kong today is really inevitable, and that's something that I feel. I mean, to answer two questions at the same time, my sense is that creativity or whatever we say about creation should be related to the social conditions, should be related to the human condition at the time. And I feel that there's not, I mean, for example, I'm always thinking 100 years ago you have a system, a new aesthetic, a new requirements, a new way of looking at the built environment, a new way of incorporating technology and making a new lifestyle, or maybe making a new attitude in the name of modernism. And how come within this 100 years nothing really much has changed? And only in the last maybe 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, when we have our smartphone, iPhone, a lot of things have changed. But architecture hasn't reflected that. Or, I mean, I'm not talking about arts, but architecture hasn't reflected that. And so, in that sense, can we see creativity in our students by empowering them to imagine the future based on their current social condition? So whether it's in Hong Kong when they were worried about their future, the political future, or they were in Singapore when they are too comfortable, but maybe the government wants to give them a better sense of reality. So how in those kind of situations the students can react to? I have some students in Singapore wanting to do a thesis project designed for what happened in Hong Kong. And so, so how do you cross over when you're not sure about what Hong Kong is going to be, and with a very comfortable position in Singapore, how do you cross that over? And I think that's really something that we will attempt to encourage the student to really move out.
I also would like to insert that you had two questions. As I am a university teachers, this is also what I would like to know, or how to encourage our students to be more creativity in architecture. But as a developing countries, Myanmar, we have a lot of the problem and difficulties how to encourage the students, because we cannot facilitate the students in the university like a studio environment, or sometimes whenever we send our students to the international design competition, as our teaching system, the pedagogy system in our university plan is a kind of the send of a lot of the calculation subjects, and less how can I say, not net type in the studio. So we cannot supposed to our student to be fully 100% of the creativity. It depends on the students their original skill. So this is also our difficulties, and we are not. I don't know where is the way to encourage our students, and also.
Yeah, trying to answer you. Thinking regionally is kind of difficult. actually, because Southeast Asia, as like Pak Johannes said, it's a construction in itself, I think Hong Kong is Southeast Asia for me, I mean, just because of my experience. Or I want to believe, I don't know, X-Files. But something like one thing, just a portrait. I learned about Rangon here instead of me coming there, just like a couple of hours away, I have to go here and then meet. So what is a region like that, Like, it's not the most difficult region on the planet, yes. But yeah, facts like that becoming like super difficult for us. That's why the logic of funding, all those kind of stuff, the art world, architecture, whatever, cultural, there's a problem there, I think, that I have to be here in order for me to learn from you, or we met in, I'm lucky. How many Indonesians have lived in Phnom Penh? I'm just like one of them, Like, there's not that many. So we have like already like neighborly feeling, but if you ask regular Indonesians, with like whatever happened in Phnom Penh or Siem Reap, how you guys fight the Thai, for example, they would just like, yeah, whatever, Like that kind of stuff is not there yet. So talking about region is something difficult. When we kind of like try to think about it for any kind of project, it's because of, it started with AirAsia actually, because that's when actually I can visit Malaysia and Vietnam easily. Before that, when Malaysia Airlines were still good, and Garuda is still, whatever, Garuda is always a joke. But it was, I still remember the late Issei was wearing AirAsia t-shirt in openings because he thought that like, that airline was actually bringing more changes compared to other institutions in Southeast Asia, in the regional thinking, basically. So that's kind of a difficult way to answer, a difficult thing to answer about region. And then it's like, okay, what should we think about, basically? I don't know.
So, it's very hot. And yes, I think we should come to an end. And I would say, that we can continue the conversation, staying outside, having a drink, and continue the discussion in the different places we will go later in the year, and hopefully learn more about all these places and the challenges which could, and hopefully we can bring back something what we learned about these local challenges and discourses. Thank you very much for being here, and